really excited for the conversation that we're about to dive into. One of the big themes that has been running through a lot of the dialogue today has been around how some of the world's largest enterprises and business leaders can really seize the moment with AI and use this window of opportunity that seems to be very much a generational window to really try and transform business and really leapfrog to new levels of scale and success. But when you think about how much of the AI innovation landscape is really shaped by the startup ecosystem, by startups, by founders, and these builders and these teams that are really pushing the boundaries in so many ways, it then follows that the AI success formula for a lot of the world's largest enterprises really depends upon how effectively they can vet and select the right startup partners, and how expertly they can navigate these very dynamic and sometimes complex partnerships with these fledgling organizations that are evolving in so many different ways. And for startups, on the other side of the table, the playbooks of how you engage, pitch, and really convince both enterprise customers as well as top-tier investors, those playbooks are really being turned upside down today, and the rules are changing very fast. And so with that background, we are going to have a really fun conversation, I think, comparing notes on how these two key kinds of capital allocators, financial investors on the one hand, and then business leaders at some of the world's largest enterprises, how they are thinking about investing capital as well as organizational energy and resources into the right kinds of startup partnerships and AI partnerships. And to opine on that, we have a pretty incredible lineup of leaders. We're joined by Klaus, who is Chief Procurement Officer and Head of Supply Chain at Siemens. He has been in that leadership role for well over a decade. His tenure at Siemens spans well over 25 years. And in his capacity, he oversees, I think, over 35 billion euros in annual procurement spend, really centered around the mission of infusing both resilience but also innovation into Siemens' supply chain. We also have with us Tomas, who is CIO and Head of Business Transformation at Miro, which also happens to be an ICONIQ portfolio company and also a Salesforce Ventures company. And for those of you that may not be aware, although I'm guessing most of you are aware, Miro is very much a local success story. It was seeded and founded right here out of Amsterdam before becoming a global leader in the digital innovation workspace category. Nowi joins us from Salesforce Ventures, whereas he's a managing director based out of London, really helping lead the organization's investment and operations out of Europe. His team focuses on mid-stage investments in pretty much every aspect and every category of enterprise software. Some of the investments that Nowi has helped drive include companies like Wiz, Sneak, 11 Labs, and of course, Miro. And last but certainly not the least, we have with us Natalie, who is a GM at PepsiCo Labs, which is PepsiCo's tech venturing innovation arm that is responsible for scouting and scaling startups across key business functions. You'll find, and I know this to be the case, that Natalie is very much a recognized voice on the best practices in tech venturing. So, without further ado, would love to dive into the question of what are the key points of convergence and divergence between large enterprises on the one hand and investors on the other when it comes to evaluating startups? And if it's okay, I'll start by posing this question to some of the enterprise leaders that we have here first. When you think about your complex needs as large global organizations, and you think about the dynamic profile of startups, what are some of the top evaluation criteria that you think about when you look to select startups? And how do you decide when to partner with a startup versus partnering with or making a bet on an existing incumbent? Klaus, I'll start with you, if that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you. To answer your question, I guess it's pretty simple, okay? So first of all, it must be an excellent solution. So this is per se not so easy to figure out because it should deliver a certain value which fits into our process landscape, which is normally not so easy because if you can imagine, a company like Siemens has a very well-experienced process landscape. I'm not saying it's a brownfield, it's something which is really complex. And we got to make sure that new solutions are fitting perfectly into this kind of process landscape and technology landscape. And that needs, of course, a startup company who can be really aware of that complexity. And the second one is it should be, in a way, financially stable. So that means at least A-series. Otherwise, it could be painfully hard for us to work with these companies together, because once we are together, then we have the obligation to really make it happen. And that's the second one. And of course, topics like SaaSability, or also able to fit into our AI strategy, is a must. So these are the really rough 4 principles we take when we screen all these startups which are out there.
I think for us, we're a smaller company and tech, so we just go faster. There are a few things. I think on top of what you said, I agree 100%. I would say security is one huge aspect nowadays for scalability as well. Ultimately, we're building a partnership towards a business outcome. So we don't see it as implementing a tool. We see it as, what is the problem you can solve for us? How can we revolutionize or transform how we operate? And then, because that is going to take time, how do we make sure that you are in the business for long? So it has to do with the standing perspective in the investment rounds, but also in the security part. I think the other part that is critical is discerning or distinguishing what are the companies that are solving for a particular problem statement versus for a business outcome. And more we see that this shift is starting to happen, where I'm no longer being pitched for a tool that solves a particular problem, but rather for a solution that is actually a bit more horizontal across the board. So the pitching is no longer to the CIO only, but the CIO as an opener for the whole executive suite across the board. Those actually make a huge difference between, regardless of whether they are small or larger companies. Yeah.
Natalie?
Yeah, so happy to add. So I agree with Tomas that solving a critical business problem for us is key, and that's how we first and foremost start evaluating startups, right? You see here multiple startups, some are in the same domains, but then really for us, it's what's the problem to solve. Then we look into what is the business value and ROI we're going to get from these solutions, and how they differ, to your maybe second questions, from the incumbent type solutions, right? And if we're thinking about it, let's say from, it's 3 or 4 T's when I was thinking about it in my head, it's technology. Right? Is your tech very, very good? How is it differentiated from an incumbent solution, right? Timing, are you faster? Are you really more agile? And can you get us to our business outcomes and solve our business critical needs in a timely way? And that's our expectation when we do work with startups. And then traction, right? We want to make sure that we're working with companies that have already had some experience working with enterprises or with other customers, just to give us that level of confidence. And going to confidence, it's also trust, right? We need to make sure that we're working in the long run, right, to Klaus's point, and we're really creating a business partnership for the long run, especially when we're working with startups. So we want to make sure that we can not only solve for the current critical needs, but that we can potentially also build a roadmap together with the startups that we partner with, right? And those are some of also the key elements why we would choose a startup versus an incumbent, right? It's typically speed, also price, right? Sometimes their pricing needs to be more competitive. And when they're solving a white space, right? That's maybe the easiest part, because certain incumbent solutions can't solve for everything within, let's say, our needs. And those are the areas where it's easiest to implement.
So fit within your broader technology portfolio and landscape. Security is a given, obviously. Solving for a business outcome versus tech for the sake of tech. And then that ability to really influence the product roadmap is certainly unique to startups. Nowi, from an investor's perspective, based on what some of our other panelists have shared, where do you see the points of convergence versus divergence in terms of how you parse the landscape and how you evaluate startups from where you sit?
For sure. And thanks for having me, Shruti. So a lot of points ring very true. And actually, the point about financial stability is something that we come across more often, where actually startups are reaching out to us for like, hey, I have this potential large contract with a massive enterprise buyer, but they're asking me about my runway, about my growth and traction. And for that, sometimes they actually need to raise more money. So that we've seen that happen more often recently. I'd say the other point that we have noticed, because we make a lot of introductions for our portfolio companies to enterprises, is we are very comfortable talking to the founders and figuring out what is the product, what does it look like now, what does it solve for now, and then see how they look at future roadmap, what is the bigger vision, and what will the product look like in the next 6, 12, and 24 months. That vision to us is super important, and I often see that we're more comfortable taking that risk versus enterprise buyers. Now on the trust point, I guess, credibility is, what we are trying to figure out is, do you speak the language of your prospects, of your customers? So can you actually build that trust in your sales conversations? And we try to test that by putting them in a room together or on a Zoom call together with a potential buyer and seeing how that goes. We try to go deep on product demos. So we're trying to, I guess, really do the same things, but we also look ahead of like, hey, this is maybe a diamond in the rough, and we need to be in this company because there will be an outcome like in a few years' time.
I think just one quick point on the looking ahead is critical, because something that happened last year and now is happening a bit less is many times we had startups pitching to us, and their whole product was probably a feature within an existing player. So the whole product was trying to solve something that, for example, Workday, the Salesforce of this world, was not solving for. And the question was, okay, I buy you now, but what is your roadmap in 2 years if the more established player already develops that as a feature set inside of their current capabilities? Because again, integrations is critical, and simplifying for the tech landscape is massive. So that, I think there is a bit of a shift already, but this is the exact same question we ask ourselves as well.
Very often with startups, because of the confines of the laws of physics and finite resources and time and space, they often have to start out as a feature within a broader product, and then the test you have to sort of put them through is determining whether they have a vision and really the staying power to get past being a feature. And speaking of staying power, I think some of you in your commentary, you have sort of implicitly alluded to the question of defensibility. And for AI startups in particular, in the last few years, the playing field has just been disrupted so significantly. The bar for innovation and also the existential risks for startups are way higher by factors of 10, 20, 30x than what they were even maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Given that rapid pace of market disruption, how do you just think about assessing for the true defensibility and differentiation in a startup's product and in their business? Obviously, stage and amount of capital raised is one piece. The more money you have in the bank, the more you can defend your turf, live to fight another day. But what are some other elements of defensibility and differentiation that you think about, especially in a world where incumbents and the tech titans that really run the tech ecosystem are not sleepy, they're moving quite fast. How do you think about that and make a bet?
I mean, what you mentioned, this financial stability is a brutally must. That's quite clear. On the other side, we also have to detect a little bit the strategic environment, because it's also sometimes not so easy if you are together with the startup and then all of a sudden the startup is taken over by somebody else. And then you are in a completely different ball game. So this is something you shouldn't underestimate. It's not easy to figure that out up front, but it's an issue. The other topic which we see is many startups underestimate this complexity they are facing if they are together with Siemens. For these startups, Siemens is a big euro coin. Okay, so they can increase their revenue, and they want to do everything for us. And I can tell you, they promise us the moon. Okay, so not knowing what it means if you are together with a company who who has different business types, software business, product business, big project business around the globe, more than 65,000 suppliers. So sometimes they are a little bit overwhelmed. And for us is this thin line to figure out in which point in time we really say, okay, stop, we can't go forward because it's too risky. And what is the point to say, okay, this solution is so unique, we put all our effort into, because then we can create this famous advantage against competition, or we gain efficiency or effectiveness, or you name it. So this is not always easy to detect up front.
From an investment standpoint, Nowi, how do you assess for defensibility when you're listening to startup pitches and making decisions about initial investments, follow-on investments, and beyond?
Yeah. If you take it to the extreme, some people, when they're talking about AI, they say there is no moat anymore. It's all about distribution. So who gets to potential customers the first, who has an unfair advantage, maybe because of their network, or just in terms of the media attention they get. And yes, in certain verticals within AI, this probably applies. I think OpenAI could be an example of that. But if we're talking, in this case, more about the supply chain, procurement processes, the tech stack, the distribution will get you, very, very far, yes. But you won't necessarily be the only game in town. It is about the complexity of understanding the workflows and being able to find a good starting point, your hook, basically, to get into an enterprise and then start building from there. And that's what we're really trying to look for. We've been actively investing in various vertical AI solutions, not yet in supply chain or procurement, even though we do have an investment that is kind of like pre-generative AI wave. But for example, in insurance and in credit and lending, trying to figure out how do they think about the tech stack in place at their prospects, and how to then essentially create a layer that can work with whatever is in place, such that they can get deeply embedded in the workflows, also understand the workflow, so then the domain expertise of the founders becomes super relevant. And that's more how we think about defensibility. The last bit is, and people keep talking about this also in the here and now, is taste of how do you create software? What does it look like? What is the UI and UX? And that, I think, is now more often forgotten, because we've seen the ChatGPTs, the Geminis pop up. But actually, how you can interact with the software is still super relevant, and you're still going to need to build that, even though it will be augmented by vibe coding solutions and things like that.
Yeah. Stickiness absolutely is something that's easy to undervalue, but really, really goes to the test in moments of just spending disruption and just dislocation in enterprise IT portfolios. And I think the second piece that you were alluding to was really just around founder resilience, right? A big part of a startup's defensibility or lack thereof is really the founding team, and whether they have the staying power and the right mindset to keep pivoting and driving through changes. What are some of the biggest mistakes, Natalie, that founders make when pitching to really, really attractive potential customers like PepsiCo? You've opined on this. A lot of your thoughts on these topics have sometimes gone viral. Would love to hear about, in the current environment that we are in 2025, the golden age of AI, what are some of the biggest mistakes that even some of the most successful founders are making?
Yeah, so I'll try to keep it brief, because this is a topic I love talking about. No, so I think it's a few things, right? First and foremost, and I think this is relevant for every pitch that every person is doing, is really not knowing your audience, but in the broader sense of the meaning of this. It's not knowing whether it's a technical team or an innovation team or a business owner. So you need to understand if the level of technicalities, especially today with Gen AI, Agentic AI, sometimes business leaders don't exactly know the difference, right? And if you're talking to enterprise architecture or to a technical team, you're not talking to a business leader. You need to talk business to them. You need to talk outcome. You need to talk ROI. So it's a different type of conversation, right? I think another mistake is really how you're engaging in general, right? It's also, of course, don't overpromise, underdeliver, but especially when we're talking or thinking about earlier stage companies, you really, really need to know the complexities before you go into any of these conversations. I tried to keep it to one thing that I think is most critical, but I think that's what we're mostly seeing.
So shifting gears to talking about the potential for AI to transform procurement and supply chain as core functions. Klaus, where are you most excited for AI-led innovation in these functions? And also, the counterpoint of that, where have you been perhaps the most disappointed or underwhelmed in areas where maybe AI should have had an impact, but we are still waiting for that to happen?
Sure. Now all eyes on me. Yeah. No, I have to say the opportunities we can get from these AI and AI agent is enormous. And we did a lot of, let's say, exercises also within the company, and we try to prepare us for this kind of transformation process. And it's always the same story. We all know a lot. We have high expertise. We talk to many, many people. But when it comes to the implementation, how do we create really value? Then it is at the very end, it's, from my point of view, it's no longer a technical issue, okay? It's now more the question, how can you convince, how can you motivate your people to really go that transformation process? And in some cases, and we had the talk before, it reminds me a little bit of the situation of these famous, I call it the couch motor phenomenon. So as I remember, that there was a time when we had horse-drawn coaches. Yeah, that means you had these horses in front of the coach. And then all of a sudden, the motor was developed. And the early adoption was you put the motor into the coach instead of the horse. That led to the situation that the performance wasn't so good enough. So then people started to think about the construction of a car is completely different to a coach. So that reminds me a little bit of the situation we are doing at the moment. We are checking our existing processes and think about which pieces of the procurement process could be replaced. So that's this famous efficiency game. Without thinking about the bigger picture, is there anything we have to organize in principle differently? So I think this is, for us now, the biggest challenge. How can we change our processes, our platforms, on a higher, different level to really get the most out of this AI technology? Otherwise, we are just on the surface getting maybe 10 or 20%, or might it be 30% efficiency? And maybe some organizations feel great, but I believe it's not worth spending the effort. And this can only be done if you really fully understand the potential, and also when you have people who really take this journey.
Tomas, Natalie, any other thoughts on where you see the greatest potential for AI to make a needle-moving impact in procurement?
Yeah, I think we're already starting to see, right? I think for us, it's, and where I'm excited about in procurement specifically, it's where we're becoming a more proactive than reactive function. And I think when we have more analytics, when we're seeing new AI capabilities within supplier risk, or e-sourcing capabilities, or demand forecasting, those are areas when we're really shifting the abilities of our business to make better outcome decisions, and really create more productivity for the organization and become a true valued partner for the whole organization, and we're a big company. So that's where I see a shift that's very, very positive. I think for us, and probably for every company, data is still the underlying, I don't know if to say problem, but a hurdle we need to go through, and that's something that we're still putting a lot of time and effort, and I would have wanted that portion, let's say, to be accelerated quickly. So that's maybe an area where I still see a lot of room for growth. And to Klaus's point, I think on the connecting threads, right? That's something that we still need to work on, whether it's between departments, whether it's as a whole, or whether it's in general with different solutions that we have. How are we breaking those silos and creating more of a platform within these AI solutions that we're implementing?
Yeah, absolutely. Data continues to be a recurring theme, and I'm yet to meet the Fortune 500 company, or even the startup, for that matter, that believes it really has an amazing handle on its data regime. So absolutely an opportunity area.
Yeah, no, I think the interesting thing is we are starting the fiscal year planning right now with our CFO, and the conversation is very interesting because we are moving into first the tech stack assessment, but then that also translates into the question is no longer do we need this solution or this technology, but it's actually do we need to do it ourselves versus can this be outsourced and automated or given to AI? So the discussion starts being a lot more indeed about this software which is evolutionary versus revolutionary. Are we going to change what we do or just change a bit of how we do things? If the answer is it's going to just change how we do things in increments, it's not necessarily worth the investment. And the investment is not only financial. The other investment, which is huge, is the change management in the employees, right? Because you're bringing new ways of doing things, and that takes time. So we need to be very smart in that. And my CFO is constantly challenging, no longer in terms of what is it that this software does, but rather give me insights and intelligence in the whole stack and all the overlapping points where we could already outsource, automate. So it's a much more interesting conversation going forward in terms of procurement and overall fiscal planning for tech stack. Yeah.
A lot has been said about agentic AI, obviously, in the dialogue and the sessions we've had today, and we've alluded to it a little bit in some of the commentary we've just had on the panel. I think one really interesting aspect of agentic AI and sort of the success drivers or lack thereof is really around sort of the change management piece that you were talking about. And Klaus, in a conversation we had a week ago, I thought it was fascinating, where you talked a little bit about sort of the mindset shift and the upskilling needs of the organization. And if you think about teaching a workforce really of any generational background, from millennials all the way through to folks that have been in the workforce for 40 plus years, the idea of working with an agentic set of colleagues is such a huge mindset shift for any generation, for any company type, let alone an established enterprise like Siemens with a 160-plus-year history. How are you thinking about readying the organization for an agentic future where they have to navigate between both human and agentic colleagues?
First of all, I have to say we are at the very beginning, okay? So we are not experts in that regard. So we had an internal discussion and thought about how can we introduce an AI agent. So some people said, yeah, this is a technical issue, this is an algorithm, and the algorithm can do this and that, and blah, blah, blah. And then we say, okay, why don't we think about an onboarding of an AI agent, like an onboarding of a real physical colleague. So imagine you have let's call it a normal colleague, yeah? So once the colleague comes the first time in the office, you say, okay, I introduce this colleague to this colleague, to this colleague, what are the do's and don'ts, and what are the interfaces, and blah, blah, blah. And then you had a certain onboarding plan, okay? So now, why don't we do the same for an AI agent? Because that probably would increase the acceptance in the organization so that the people feel in total onboarded. So they know there is somebody aside who helps me, hopefully, yeah, instead of there's a thread around some generic artificial stuff which is in the computer, you never know. So in other words, we try to personalize a little bit this idea of the AI agent. And again, we are right at the beginning, but I strongly believe this interaction between the humans and this artificial agent is so necessary. And somebody in the organization said, I guess it was our CEO, yeah, that was Roland, he said, we, all together, we have a privilege We are probably the one and only generation who worked without agents and now can work with agents. All the other generations will not have this experience working without agents. So it is on us to shape this kind of relationship. And again, for us, it's no longer a technical issue. It's the question, how do we deal with this new technology? How can we embrace it? How can we motivate the organization?
It's fascinating, and obviously no playbooks, no prior journeys to draw from. So it'll be really fascinating to see how you navigate that. Shifting gears to talking a little bit more about ROI, the business value that you were alluding to earlier, Tomas. In a lot of the enterprise and C-suite conversations that we have with global enterprise leaders, board directors, and CXOs across industries at ICONIQ, we are noticing that as the costs, the real costs, that total economic cost you were just alluding to, as the costs of AI adoption are becoming much better understood, executives are just becoming much, much more hyper-attuned to which kinds of economic models and commercial models they sign up to when they start working with a startup. And I was curious, Natalie, I imagine you have a lot of frameworks that you look at PepsiCo as well, given what a mature organization you have for tech venturing and scouting. How are you thinking about sort of the entire gamut of commercial and economic models when you are figuring out short-term, medium-term, and long-term pricing models and commercial models ranging from the traditional seed-based to consumption and usage-based, all the way through to the more commonly seen outcome and performance-based?
Yeah, so I think we're also still evolving in this space, right? I think we're still probably most comfortable with subscription-based because we just know what that means and what the remit is. But I think today when we're starting to pilot with new solutions, that's always a question that's coming up right now. Because I think for us, on the one hand, if you're saying or thinking about a usage model, and you want to create stickiness and you want the company to work at scale, I'm not sure that's always in the best intention, right? Even of the startup, because you're saying, okay, they'll use more, and then will we need to limit the usage? That's not something we necessarily want to do in the short term. So I think for us thinking about that, it's probably going to be more of the hybrid models of some sort of subscription-based plus, let's say, usage or performance-based. Personally, I'm a big fan of shared interest, right? I think there should be a component of shared interest. Sometimes in the short term, it's harder to quantify it. What will be the true business outcome and how are we going to pay for it? But when it's really hard cost savings, then I think that's where we're more comfortable with those type of models. And it's also a question of risk and maturity of the area that we're looking at, right? Because if it's an area that's much more risky or if we're not really sure of the business outcome, then the more traditional models will be probably easier for us to deploy and use.
When we think about ROI, one of the key challenges that we are often hearing about, and it emerged actually as a top challenge with AI adoption in a recent report that ICONIQ did on the state of AI in 2025, is really around credibly proving ROI. And I was just curious, Klaus, when you are engaging with your C-suite peers, with your CEO, with your board, and the leadership at Siemens, and you're building the business case together with them for just long-term adoption of AI and keeping investment levels where they should be, how are you thinking about proving that ROI and building that business case? What do you find works most effectively with your C-suite peers?
I mean, that's a very relevant question because when we talk to our CFOs, they always say, okay, where is the efficiency improvement by using AI? So I can imagine I attend one of some strategic meetings together with Amazon, and some of the Amazon CFOs said, using AI is a must-have bullet point in each and every budget phase. So how much money you spend for AI, what's the return? If we translate that in our terms, for us, it's not so easy to really figure out at the very beginning what is the hard fact saving or what's the real durable ROI. So what we see is there any criteria where we can speed up our processes, where we can gain a higher transparency? And how can we really be more innovative in sense of finding new structures in our processes? And that leads me to the very crucial point. Any AI business case leads finally to the question, how good is your data quality in your database? And sometimes you build up let's say, a business case on an assumption that your database is 100% clean, which is not. And you figure that out by implementing all the stuff. And then all of a sudden, your business case collapses. So this is what I said earlier. So when a startup comes into Siemens and then they have some kind of imagination what it could be to work with these guys, but really understand the needs takes another few months. And then we can calculate the real business case. The only thing we know is doing nothing in sense of AI is not optional. We just want to limit the risk. So it's not the idea that we have a high efficiency in our processes and that gains another 20, 30% efficiency. This will not work, at least for the next few months, maybe for the next few years.
Well, if you wouldn't mind looking into your crystal balls as we look to wrap, I see that that puts you in good humor, Natalie. But if you wouldn't mind looking into your crystal balls and just maybe sharing your top prediction for AI startup adoption in enterprises, or perhaps AI startup adoption in procurement and supply chain in particular. Natalie, if it's okay, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I'll try looking into my crystal ball. So I think I'll separate my answer, because I think the level of technology and the evolution that we're seeing is massive, right? Where we are today and where we're going to be in a year from now, it's a totally different world. But the question is on the enterprise readiness and where we're going to be in a year. That's maybe a different question, because I think technology is evolving so quickly. We're still catching up. I think for us, where we're starting to see much more adoption is still in the Gen AI and the conversational AI, when we're getting a lot of analytics from that. That's an area that we're now expanding quite dramatically in our organization. But we are also starting to see work with Agentic AI, first of all on the personal productivity to also help inform and help educate the organization, but also in automating, let's say, the easier workflows that can then, and the next wave, and maybe that'll be the conversation for next year, will be also connected. So hopefully we'll get there.
Thank you. We'll check back with you in a year. Nowi.
Building on Natalie's point, maybe a more like spicy take is we'll see a few companies work together in the next 12 months to adopt a supply chain procurement process workflow that doesn't require any human intervention.
I think we will see a huge difference between the companies that are actually ready and willing to disrupt themselves and really partner with different startups to rethink their processes and their ways of operating versus those companies that remain conservative. There's going to be a huge difference between those that think of AI as a tool versus AI as a catalyst for transformation of the business. And that in a year from now, we will start seeing the differences in performance, for sure.
Yeah, and maybe we are really probably the last generation who has the privilege to shape the relationship to AI agents, and we better be prepared and use it like hell. So that would be my wish and also my prediction how it works.
Amazing. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you so much.